the idea of our study here is we're likely to find a larger percentage of natives here on Nonsuch Island, where they're in, the whole intention is to make a native forest, and then compare that with Cooper's Island, where presumably, without the efforts in place, it's going to be more introduced. So our hypothesis is that on Nonsuch we're going to see a greater percentage of native and endemic species than we will on Cooper's Island.
Well, right now we're taking account of all of the trees that we see in this 10-meter transect.
And we're going to compare that to the information we find on a transect line at Cooper's Island.
Check's ready.
9 meters, 10 meters, stop.
Okay guys, come on in.
So right now we're just really counting the trees by laying down a transect to see which has a higher population, the invasives or the ones that are endemic to Bermuda, or the natives.
How many white stoppers do we have?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Nonsuch is our control site because that's where it's all endemic and native plants, and here there are invasive species and plants that aren't native, so we can really see what changes have happened.
Our hypothesis would be that Nonsuch would have more endemics and more native plants because it's been just repopulated with cedar, just mainly endemics. But here it would be, at Cooper's Island, there would be more invasive stuff like that because we've let all of these invasives thrive here pretty much.
Overall, there were a lot more introduced and invasive species, especially the Wedelia everywhere. That's really like crowding out everything, and yeah, it's even hard to walk back there.
Alright, well, you saw what we did yesterday, and we found that without a doubt Cooper's Island is full of invasive species, whereas Nonsuch obviously doesn't have very many at all. I mean, it is a replica of what Bermuda was 400 years ago, so they're all basically endemic and native plants.
We found that on Nonsuch Island there was about 95% of the native and endemic and only 5% of the invasive or introduced, and on Cooper's Island it was almost the exact opposite of that.
Whether intentional or accidental, if people start messing around with different ecosystems, most likely it will wind up with a negative effect. Although they think they're trying to help, it's usually not a very good idea.
Once again this year we've been continuing with our woodland management project out at Cooper's Island, removing the invasive species and replacing them with natives and endemics. But when we're choosing where to place native and endemic species, you can't put them anywhere. You have to know just which zone they're best adapted for. And Dready's here to explain a bit more.
Okay, so when we're planting trees here at Cooper's Island, we're not going to just do it randomly. We have to think about where they would naturally occur. We can describe this zone as the seashore. We get strong winds coming directly off the water, carrying a lot of salt spray. It's a tough environment for plants to survive. The buttonwood is an ideal seaside plant, well adapted to its environment. Behind the buttonwood, in the next zone up, we might find plants like palmettos. Palmettos can take a lot of wind, they can take a lot of salt spray, they can't have their roots in salt water ever. Now cedar trees again can survive a lot of wind and a lot of salt spray, but they need a deeper soil and they need a slightly richer soil to thrive. If we're thinking about an ideal place to plant them, it would be even a little further back from the palmettos where we have a deeper soil, less wind and less salt spray. The fourth tree that we're going to plant today is the endemic Bermuda olive wood. Now, it is a forest tree, very much a forest tree. It doesn't like the salt spray. It doesn't appreciate the wind. So if we're going to think about an ideal place to plant it, we're going to plant it far away from the seashore in an upland or a deep forest environment.
Now, when you're studying native and endemic species, it's important not to jump to conclusions. Without historical records, it's hard to know if a species is original to Bermuda or has been introduced more recently. In 1979, a new species of coral was discovered in Bermuda. It's called Briareum, and it's pretty unique in that it looks different from other corals here. It's kind of a purple, wiry whip that grows across the substrate on the bottom of the sea. But it's also unique in that it's only found in one very specific locality. And at first people said, oh, this must be something that's been recently introduced, escaped from an aquarium or brought here by ship. Dr. Jaret Bilewich is one of the scientists trying to find out more about this coral.
Addison Verrill was a curator at Yale who was fascinated with the marine environment, and he would do these collecting trips, which at the time were just unheard of. The amount of material he would collect and bring back to the museum was just enormous, and I think even to this day they still haven't gone through all the material that he collected. And in that collection was a piece of Briareum asbestinum, and we're not sure when it was collected, but it was probably any time from around 1900 to 1920 something. We now know that it's been there for at least 100 years. There's nothing to say that it's been there for 1,000 or tens of thousands of years.
It's going to take a lot of work to determine if Briareum was introduced about 100 years ago or if it's a long-term native to Bermuda. What we can deduce is that because it's only found in one locality, that it's poorly adapted to the current present-day conditions of Bermuda. So step one is going to be to map its distribution, to find out where it is now and if its range is increasing or decreasing. Back in 2004, the BioNauts were employed to head out and map its location then. This year, we're going to head out and do the same thing again. We're kind of in the triangle between the three islands that Jared says are the sort of the epicenter of Briareum on the island. So this is Governor's Island, right here, and Paget Island is the large one on this side, and then behind me here, this is Smith's Island. This was the first shipping channel into Bermuda, so the first real harbor being St. George's Harbor, and before we had Town Cut, this is where all the sailing ships used to come through.
We're all going to get in the water first, and I'll show you what Briareum looks like so you guys can all recognize it, so we're all on the same page. And then what you're going to do is, just as you swim along the shore, all you got to do is mark down where you see it and where you don't. So if you see Briareum, just put a little X on the map as you go along. And if you don't see it, just put a circle, because if you don't tell me where it's not, where you haven't found it, I don't know if we looked there or not. If you looked there and you didn't find it, or if we just didn't look there at all.
So first of all, we had to find out what we were looking for. Then we split up into our different groups and started searching around each of the islands. As we worked our way around the islands, we'd stop to mark on the map where we found Briareum and where we didn't.
That is very successful. From everything we've seen, it looks like it tends to prefer the ocean side of these islands out here. Once you get further inshore, you don't find it anymore. So
that's a lot of X's. X's mean we found some, and O's mean we didn't.
We were surveying one area where I thought there was no Briareum whatsoever, and one of the kids pointed out one colony which I had swam right over. I totally overlooked it. So young eyes and lots of enthusiasm. From what I've seen so far, it doesn't look like it's changing very much. It looks like it's a pretty stable population size. So what we now have to do is move on to the question of why is it so stable, whereas in the Caribbean you find it everywhere. It's a very hardy species. So you have town cuts on one side, and then you have the channel on the other, which used to be the old ship channel for where all the boats came in. So if there's any kind of unusual current patterns or tidal patterns in there, it would limit the ability of Briareum to disperse outwards. Obviously, it's a sessile organism. It can't go anywhere except when it reproduces. Only the young or the juveniles can disperse.
Well, a lot of mystery still surrounds Briareum and why it's only found in this one location. We still have a lot to learn about when Briareum made it to Bermuda, but we have a pretty good idea about this next invader.